Man to Men is for men like me. My name is Ben Murphy. I'm a tax accountant and a recent SMU graduate in Dallas, Texas. Hope you enjoy this episode.
This is Man to Men, the audio journal for Christian men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove with you for an in-depth conversation with a courageous leader. And today we have Drew Hunter. Drew has authored a great book, guys. I recommend it to you highly. It's called Made for Friendship, the relationship that halves our sorrows and doubles our joys. He also has works on the biblical books of Isaiah and Matthew in the Knowing the Bible series. And he's the teaching pastor at Zionsville Fellowship in Zionsville, Indiana. Drew Hunter, welcome to Man to Men.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, I'd shared with you a little bit while we were pre-gaming is that you are someone that I've followed for a long time, got the book, I guess, right when it came out. And I was so glad that a man was writing on this subject. It's been one that's been really important in my life. So this has been a conversation I've wanted to have for a long time.
That's great. Yeah, it's been a topic that I have not stopped caring about since writing on it. So it's still top of mind in life for me.
I love that, man. Well, I actually want to start this one with an SNL joke, oddly enough. John Mulaney, a few years ago, hosted SNL, and one of his lines in the opener was that it's hard to make friends when you're an adult. And he went on to say, I think that's the greatest miracle of Jesus. He had 12 best friends in his 30s, and they weren't his wife's best friends' husbands. And then that became a meme, and it took off from there. And a lot of us chuckled at it. And I think it hit us pretty deeply, and it reveals a deep longing, I think. Can you share more about why you think a joke like that continues to connect with those of us kind of in our 30s and 40s, and what it says about the state of friendship among men today?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does connect, which is why that is funny. And I've heard that other places since it was given there. And I remember even being at a table with some guys, and I just asked them, hey, what comes to your mind when you think about friendship? Mm-hmm. And one of them said, and these guys were about in their 30s, mid-30s, and he said, that used to be nice. Mm-hmm. So it kind of, and then everyone laughs because they're all they resonate like, yeah, like we can think back to maybe high school or if you had college, where there were a lot of friends. And then now it's like, yeah, what happened? And so it's the common story for a lot of guys. And there's, probably no one simple reason for this. There's a lot of reasons. One of them is just the way our society is structured. I mean, making friends after college years can be hard because, when you're in high school or college, there's so many spheres of life that overlap. So the people you live near, you also have class with, you might work with, you might go to church or have a ministry with, and then you leave that area and you might then live in one neighborhood, work in another town, have a church in another town the other direction. If you're engaged in some hobby, that might be with some different people, and then none of them know each other. And you're driving to different places. And so our society is just structured, and that's kind of a new thing historically, in a way that's working against friendship. And then by the time guys get in their 30s and they've moved away, they realize like they don't have friends anymore, or the friends they do have, they more just like catch up with, very rarely. And so not really functioning or new experiences. So tons of reasons, technology, busyness, transience, even our understanding of what masculinity is supposed to look like can kind of make friendship harder today. So there's a lot of factors that then lead to guys in their mid-30s who may not even know those factors are working against friendship. And they just look around and they're like, I don't have friends, really. And they may think that they're alone in that, but it's actually really, really common. I remember seeing a video of some guys, and it was interviewing one after another, and guys, one after another, saying, I don't think anybody actually knows me well at all. It was really sad.
I resonate with that because, and we connected a little bit on, I serve with Bucks, but I also still continue as a local church pastor. Mm-hmm. I sit with a lot of men, and that resonates because I've sat across from so many men who, life found them somewhere, and they're struggling or they're suffering in some way. And one of them held their phone up to me one time and said, you see this? I don't have anyone in this that I can call a friend. And that really, really hit me because I felt like I was hearing that over and over.
Yeah.
as I sat with people pastorally. You had talked about it just even in your opening, which was really helpful, just the different challenges to friendship. As you were writing Made for Friendship, the book, what did you discover in the writing, in the research that surprised you the most?
Yeah, I think a couple things stand out. One was just studying in the Bible on friendship and then living my own life in our culture and then reading Proverbs and then reading statements that I did, so what I was doing is I was sitting down to study Proverbs for a teaching series, and I was going to just read through it and collect the themes and then preach on those themes. And I was not expecting friendship to be one of them. Maybe like neighbor relations, marriage, money, all those things. But I was struck by these direct, powerful, punchy statements about the narrow, particular relationship of friendship. To the point too of saying things just directly like, do not forsake your friend. Well, that's a powerful command from the Bible.
Yeah, not even a proverb. It's a command. It's funny how they're mixed in there, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And then just things about, friendship and being faithful and those things. And also thinking about Jesus as a friend. It was surprising for me to recognize that I'd not heard people talk about Jesus as a friend, not at least in a serious way, or really related to him in terms of friendship. And I realized this is serious. It's thick and deep. And I do not think of Jesus in terms of friendship. So those were surprises to me, among others, but they just startled me because I just had not thought about or heard other people think about those things.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the surprising things in the book, I think to many people, and you wrote about this, is that ancient Christians, maybe all the way back to Solomon and the collectors of the Proverbs, up to the disciples of Jesus, and even a little bit after that, these ancient Christians valued friendship as one of the great goods, if not the key good of human existence. I think that sounds astonishing to a 21st century man.
Right.
Can you share more about that view and how that's just weaved its way through Christian history?
Yeah. So it certainly is there in the Old Testament. Actually, one of the earliest statements is somewhat surprising. It's a passing comment, seemingly in Deuteronomy 13.
Yes.
Where there's a number of relationships just being listed to make a bigger point. So it's like your wife, your sister, your daughter, your mother-in-law. I mean, just list, and then it lists your friend. And some translations will just translate it your friend or your close friend, which might be fine. But the actual kind of wooden literal translation of the Hebrew is your friend who is as your own soul.
Yeah.
So it's just striking that even with this ancient text in Deuteronomy with Moses and the Lord here, friend is just kind of glossed quickly as, well, the relationship that's someone's as your own soul. And then you have Proverbs, of course. And then, even in ancient cultures with non-Christians, with Cicero and these people, are Aristotle, they're writing massive things about and saying massively important things about friendship. But then Christians really embrace this in a unique way. So I think one of the things that Luke, even as a writer of Acts, is doing is taking the stock ideas and phrases used for friendship in his day that were viewed as an ideal that could hardly ever actually get pulled off. And he just uses those in describing the church and what they're doing. They had all things in common. They were of one mind and one heart. And then, so that's just picked up and continues. So you have Augustine saying things like, there's two things that are essential for existence. So you're like, okay, if Augustine's saying there's two things that are essential, what are they?
Right.
And the first thing he says is life. We're like, okay, I could have guessed that one. So really,
got it. We're here.
Yeah. So besides life, I guess there's one thing left. And he says it's friendship. J.C. Ryle, my favorite quote, I think, of friendship, and he kind of picked this up, kind of saying like this came through the ages of this having our troubles and doubling our joys. But he said it this way. He said, this world is full of sorrow because it's full of sin. It's a dark place. It's a lonely place. It's a disappointing place. And then he said, the brightest sunbeam in it is a friend. Friendship halves our troubles and doubles our joys. So here's a man who's teaching, preaching, leading, and he wanted people to know that God, in light of the realism of how hard life is, God has given us a sunbeam in the darkness, and the brightest one is friendship. C.S. Lewis wrote The Four Loves, but he also wrote about friendship and wrote about friendship in The Four Loves, but he also just wrote about friendship in his letters to friends. And so one of the letters he wrote, he said, friendship is the greatest of worldly goods. And by that, he just meant the greatest of earthly goods. And he said, certainly to me, it's the chief happiness of life. So none of these guys are careless with their words or given to just overstatement that you can be like, yeah, that's, they're careful. And they said those kinds of things. So if we don't say, think, or hear those kinds of things, we just have to ask, either they're wrong or we're missing something and they know something that we don't. Yeah.
And ordering your life as though friendship is one of the greatest goods is, I think, one of the bigger challenges that we face, particularly just as men, and given all the challenges you listed at the top of the show. I love your biblical view on this, and this is one thing that has just made me really just go back to the book and recommend the book to many, many men, because friendship with other men became a prayer of mine at the age of 13 after I first read about David and Jonathan. That was the first time I tried to pick up my Bible, and I remember trying to find just a familiar story. I didn't know my way around. And so I'm like, David and Goliath, that'd be a cool story. Well, I went about a chapter too long, and I found myself reading after the Goliath incident. David is standing there and meets Jonathan, and I see their friendship form, and I just kind of kept reading, and it became a breath prayer of mine at that point. It's like, Lord, like I want to be that kind of friend. I want those kinds of friends. It just deeply resonated with me. And you share some of these in the book, but what are some biblical examples of friendship? David and Jonathan certainly, but other ones that can help guide us as men who find friendship challenging to make a priority, maybe even find it hard to discover. We want to pray and work toward friends. What are some biblical examples for us to give us hope?
Yeah. So, David and Jonathan would be one for men to go back to, because I do think that we sometimes are like, well, we know about that one, but actually slowing down to read their story for Samuel 18 to 20, is really helpful to do and just look at it fresh. Because it is fascinating. The language used of their souls bound together, their kind of faithfulness, their affection and love, and even weeping for one another. It's really striking to read their friendship and the courage of it. I think for women, Ruth and Naomi's a good one as well there, to look at their story in terms of friendship. And then I think even fast forward in the New Testament, Jesus and his disciples, we shouldn't overlook that as an example of friendship, because he himself called his disciples his friends, which means he's treating them in terms of friendship. So, when you do just look at the story of Jesus, you are left kind of wondering, or you could at least wonder, okay, is this discipleship and training, or is this friendship? Because they're taking long walks together, they're having meals at gatherings, evening conversations.
Yeah, they're hanging out.
They're hanging out. And the answer is both, right? Jesus blended those things together. And so seeing how Jesus is the truest friend and how he treated his disciples with patience and kindness, but directness, that actually is an ideal example of friendship. I think Paul is a great example too in the New Testament. When you read through the book of Acts, or just listen for this in his letters, he's constantly traveling with friends and with the team of people, Luke and Barnabas and Timothy, and watching him with them, watching him with these, I guess they're not close friends, but he spent a lot of time with the elders in Ephesus, and then he's with them in Acts 20. And then by the time he's leaving them, they're all crying because they're not going to see each other again. And so he had spent years with them, planting the church and raising them up in friendship. And then he's weeping as he leaves. And then just seeing how he writes to Timothy and how he speaks about even other people, like in the middle of Philippians, toward the end of chapter 2, the way he talks about Timothy and Epaphroditus, honoring them, speaking about their relationship. It's really striking that you just see this was a man who lived his life with lots of people. He's honoring them, encouraging them, relying on them, celebrating them. And obviously sometimes it gets hard, right? Paul has this sharp disagreement in the book of Acts, and sometimes there's a temporary parting of ways, or at least to get on with the mission. Right. So those are a few examples.
Yeah. You mentioned something, and I'm wondering if maybe we can do a little bit more of a deep dive, because this is something I've had to deal with in the last 20 years, particularly around the David and Jonathan story. You mentioned some of the language that's used there. and sometimes how alien that can feel to us. David loved Jonathan as his own soul.
Yep.
You mentioned the Deuteronomy passage, the friend who is as your own soul. And just given a lot of we'll just call it relational and sexual confusion that we have here, people take those passages and really begin to just say, well, see, right there, it says they loved each other. Mm-hmm. We all know what that means, right? We know that's not what the Bible's saying. What have you found in your studies around that language of that love and soul language of, let's just say in this case, two men who are friends? How is that holy in the Bible, and how can we be equipped to refute that when we hear about it?
Yeah. So the key word you actually used was people take that to be sexual, and take present tense, because it's historically new. Going back before a few decades ago, nobody is writing anything about taking these relationships as sexualized. So it's a product of our cultural situation and time right now that we read that back into it, which should make us aware, okay, how do we think about relationships and love and sexuality differently today than really anywhere else throughout history, to where we have all these suspicions and thoughts about these things. But yeah, in the Bible, you have men expressing affection with one another, and you can use the word love for it. And that had shaped relationships of men for throughout history, and it had even shaped Western culture for a while. So I read a book called I think it's The Overflowing of Friendship. And it was by the author's not a Christian. He's I think sociologist, historian, Richard Godbeer. And he'd read these letters from the end of the 1700s, early 1800s, of men writing letters to each other, because that's the way we have their relationship preserved, as if they were separated and they wrote. And he says, I read the way that they wrote to each other, which sounds like David and Jonathan, a guy named Arthur writing to a friend named David and saying, I had no idea how hard it would be to live apart from you. I didn't realize how much our happiness was bound together. Please know that I'm affectionately and unalterably your friend. Good night, Arthur. In these kind of language. And he said he reads that and his students just, their jaws drop and they're just like, what?
Right.
They're suspicious. And he's done enough study to say nothing is going on here at all. So something's changed in the way that we understand just this hypersexualization of relationships and love and masculinity, to where we don't imagine that affection, tenderness, kindness, language of love can be used by a man in a friendship without it being sexual. But that is what we see in David and Jonathan. We see it in the Apostle Paul. We see that in even the way that Jesus will relate to people. And so I think we need to recover a more historic and biblical vision of masculinity, get rid of some of the influence of Freud and Darwin that's really influenced how we understand masculinity today, and just re-embrace some of the characteristics that we now say are exclusively feminine, which really they belong to both genders expressed in different ways.
Yeah, well said. Something that came out, I believe it was last year, the Surgeon General released this blockbuster report on the loneliness epidemic, really affecting both genders, but particularly in men. The loneliness epidemic is leading men, and that does just mean men without friends is what we could say. It's leading to increased isolation of men, just constant fatigue, lack of motivation, long-term illness, like they just can't get over being sick. And honestly, I think even the rise in poor mental health, or the decline, whichever way you want to put it, particularly among men. How in the world do we help men in our churches and communities discover friendship, give them the imagination for it? Because like you said, it's difficult sometimes, making that ancient jump. Helping them see it as God sees it. What are some things that we can do, Drew?
Well, I love the way that you put it with giving an imagination for it. We lack the imagination for it, because that really strikes me as one of the challenges is we've not seen it modeled. We don't know what it looks like. So many people, their story is they had parents who didn't have friends, or they never saw their parents' friends. They didn't see it with the 30 and 40 and 50 somethings they might have grown up with. They don't see it in their other friends. And the Surgeon General was saying the stats were here way before the pandemic. So this is not just from the pandemic,
That's right.
the past 20, 30 years. So we've really just not seen this done well. We need to kind of cultivate that imagination. So I think for those who have the ability to talk to others or teach others or lead others in it, I think making this a topic of explicit focus is important. And for me, it's been helpful to distinguish community generally from friendship in particular.
Yes.
So I found when I first started thinking about this, there was a big trend, and rightly so, on community and community groups. And then I was just realizing we're talking about this a lot. We're doing these groups well. But I was like, as I started thinking about friendship, I was like, I don't know that these guys or women actually all have friendships. We're doing the connection in general well, but friendship itself, this everyday life, soul on soul, knowing each other through the thick and thin, long-term through life, isn't getting cultivated, even though we are generally talking about community. So I think focusing on friendship, getting clear about it, and then so teaching on it. Second would be modeling it. So giving people a picture of it, what it can actually look like. So and that has been actually a problem with Christian leaders. Some of the people that have kind of either dropped out or blown up their ministries, if you just look at their stories, in most cases, I heard someone say every case, but at least the ones I've seen, they'll say something like either themselves or people's observations that their problem was they taught on community, but they lived in isolation. So they aren't even modeling what they're talking about. So pursuing it yourself, modeling it in front of other people, and then giving guys pathways to pursue it. So I think men's ministries, small groups, all those are important, but recognizing that these have a unique role, but they do not replace or completely fill up what friendship needs to be in our lives. So a men's ministry gathering can create context to teach about this and get guys to connect. Small groups can be a place to forge friendships. But every man needs to be called to take personal initiative with other men in the everyday rhythms of life for this to happen. So giving that expectation and calling men to that while giving context to forge connections. Those are a few things that we can do.
Yeah. No, you're right. How would you distinguish between community? Let's say, me and my small group that meets in my home, every Sunday night, as opposed to friendship. That's an interesting discussion of it. I've written on that before, being a groups pastor for a couple decades. People always thought, oh, good, I got put in a group, found my friends, and then they got mad pretty quickly. Right. So how can we help pastor people through that? It's like, hey, there's community and there is friendship.
Yeah. I think the key is to distinguish them, but recognize that they overlap and they should overlap. So it'd be really weird if you're in a small group and over time, you're like, none of these people are my friends. But it's also an unrealistic expectation to join a group and then think, now here are all my friends. So I just think it overlaps. It should be a place of deep community. And over time, ideally, you have 1, 2, 3, maybe more in that group. You're forging the kind of deeper connections and this mysterious union of real friendship happening and spending time in everyday life together. If you were to move away for whatever reason, you're still connecting with them and spending time over time with them. Yeah. And then, so that should happen in a small group, ideally. But then outside of that, you should be having friends that aren't necessarily part of a structured rhythm in your life, like a small group. But they're the people that still you're journeying through life with, long term. So I just think the church should be kind of filled with all sorts of degrees of community. Acquaintance, casual friends, close friends, and then groups that it overlaps. All those are really important. But we just have to have a distinguished place for friendship that weaves into all of those, but is its own thing. That's good. No, I appreciate the distinguishing it. So as men are pursuing friends, one of the things you wrote about in the book was fast food friendship. And I think we see a lot of that. What's a fast food friendship as opposed to the kind of soul level friendship that you and I have been discussing out of the Bible and through history? Yeah. So, fast food, it's cheap, it's easy, it's convenient, but probably not going to be very healthy for you long term. So friendships can become like that when we just don't give them attention and we just kind of take it for granted that it's going to happen. Then we just really will gravitate toward people when it's easy, or when they have something to offer us when we have a need. You call because because you have an event to invite them to, or there's something going on that you need help with. But real friendship, true friendship, you're reaching out to them sometimes not because you need anything or there's anything going on, but just because you value them and you want to connect with them. Proverbs says that a friend loves at all times. And so, in the context of that is, even hard times and when calamity comes into your friend's life. And so you don't forsake your friend or your father's friend. The context of that in Proverbs is calamity. So when your friend is diagnosed with cancer or is depressed or is kind of pulling away from things or maybe just had a scandalous sin and they're feeling shame, you don't just leave them to figure it out on their own. You start moving close in gentle ways that are natural for that relationship, but you stick with them. You don't give up on them. So it involves loyalty and commitment and intentionality.
Oh man. And that's also something we have to remember to have imagination for. I think one of the stories that helped me the most in that was Sam and Frodo in Lord of the Rings. I remember that was a seminal event because those all came out right as I was in college. So, my roommates were all about the midnight showings.
Yeah.
I actually stayed awake in these because the movies were that good. But it's difficult, I think, for men to have the imagination for that kind of devotion to one another because, this just came to me. I remember sitting in one of those midnight showings and it's a full house. And I think it was a scene where Sam comes in, kind of picks up Frodo, like holds him very tenderly, and says like, I'm devoted to you, Mr. Frodo, or something along those lines. And the dudes behind me just start snickering and go, oh my gosh, they're gay. It just completely ruins a right moment. And that just showed me, it's like, that's not what's going on here. So having that imagination is so important. Those are two, characters, I guess. They're not really men. They're hobbits, who are devoted to one another, but who helped give me the imagination on how to best express friendship to one another. That can be a little sticky for most men. What have been some ways that, and this may be getting into some of your friendships and just ways that you've seen men express friendship for one another in this 21st century that we live in?
Yeah. Well, be prepared for people to laugh at you like those guys did, right? Because if we're going to express friendship in any way similar to Sam and Frodo, there's just assumptions about masculinity and friendship that it just does not fit with. And I think one way you can learn and answer your question is to actually study Sam and Frodo, because one of Tolkien's agendas in writing Lord of the Rings, one of the things he was doing, and I think Lewis had the same agenda, was to help recover a enlarged view of friendship, even with men, for his times, give those characters that role. So he was writing that to be an example and a model. So yeah, I think in my life, there's sometimes it's good to just express it directly and just from time to time say, I'm so thankful for our friendship. Or to just reach out and at any given time, just express why you appreciate that person or admire your friend, and just find ways to honor and encourage them in that. So if there's something that they do, just finding a natural, non-weird way to say, hey, I've noticed you've done that a couple times. I just want you to know I really appreciate that. I wasn't expecting that. That was just really kind. Thank you. Or even just if you're touching base with something else over a text or something else, you can just say, I'm just so grateful for our friendship, and just explicitly say it. Or I think just reaching out when there's no other reason other than you were thinking about them or something reminded you of them. It's powerful because when you reach out without an agenda because something else is going on, then it communicates to your friend, even subtly, subconsciously, that you are just connecting with them because you like them, because they're your friend. That's the only reason for the phone call. Hey, you came to mind. I had some time in the car. I just wanted to call and say, hey, and then mention something you were thinking about and why you appreciate them. Ask them how their day's going and hang up. People have done that to me. They have no idea how much that makes my day. Fellow friends send me a text message and just say, hey, was thinking about you, and send like a random picture we had together fishing or something. And that just subtly communicates, I don't know what they were doing today, but they were thinking of me and wanted to reach out. So I think we do, as we grow in friendship, we will think about our friends more often through a day, and then just reaching out, even in a small way, to just share a joke, share a picture, express that, give a phone call. Those even just tiny ways can be really helpful. And then, like I mentioned, directly saying, I'm grateful for our friendship, and even appropriately sometimes saying, I love you and I appreciate you at the end of maybe getting together for something or a phone call. I have friends that do that with me. I do that with them. I have other friends who I think we're not quite ready for that, for it to be non-weird, but I'd love to get there. But some I recognize we kind of are. And we've even talked about these dynamics of how friendships change in our culture, and we should be able to express this. And they've read that book as well about this. And so we actually can say, let's just do this differently,
Yeah. No, that's so good. That's so good, man. So we've got listeners from collegiates to retirees here at Man to Men. And I was going to ask you, just as this is kind of your subject matter expert. You've thought a lot about this. I sense that you're a man that has deep friendships. And I want to talk about a little bit of those in the Everywhere Every Day segment. But how would you coach us? And maybe it's through the life, like starting with, hey, I'm kind of in my college years, up through retiree. How can we be realistic about our friendships throughout life? Maybe at each stage, are there different types of friends at different times? What have you seen?
Yeah, so that's actually a really important thing to grasp. But I think I was a little slower to understand as I was thinking about friendship. But then just as I talk to other men and experience changes in my own life, I realize how a key is adjusting in different seasons and recognizing that various life circumstances change and you have to intentionally adapt to those, which is similar in other areas of life, right? You may have a plan of reading your Bible every morning, and then you get a different kind of job and then you got to change it. And so doing that with friendship. So so when you're in college, it just comes easier for more men, not all, but because you have so many overlapping situations. So I say lean into that, right? And recognize that in many ways, this is the most that you will have overlapping spheres with so many different people. And so maximize your friendships in that season. And those actually often do serve you in a lifetime, and you stay in touch with all of them. And you want to grow those friendships and not just let them stay as often happens. Your friends just kind of stay in those college years, and then you just connect every few years. But plan on these men being in your life long term. So then post college, I think being intentional to do a couple things. One, do not lose touch with the really good friendships you had established in college. Think about how to keep those live and have new experiences. So there's some friends I had that we lived near each other in high school and college, and then some of us moved apart. And so one thing we do, and we've done it for 20 years now, is we have like an adventure camping, kayaking trip in the summer, every summer. And we also try to get together if people are in the same location, because some of us are from the St. Louis area for, Thanksgiving or Christmas. There'll be a text thread, who's around, one of the guys hosts, and that intentionality of a few of these guys there to host makes that happen. And then the email threads and text threads are going through the year with just banter and then checking in, and sometimes a serious concern that we can pray for, something like that. Other guys that I guess this is related to moving and leaving college, but if you move, I had 3 close friends, Dane, Don, and Joe. We would get together personally and then often all together when I lived up in the Wheaton area, and we'd grill together and have a fire together. And then I moved 3.5 hours away, and we just decided we're not going to let this go. We do not want this to be a friendship that we just kind of miss and we just kind of see each other every few years or something. So we just committed to making the drive. So for a good 10 years now, the past couple years have been a little less, and we're trying to plan the next one here. 2-3 times, usually 3 times a year, I would drive up there 3.5 hours or so. Sometimes they'd come down to me just for an evening to sit around a fire and hang out. And that's been great, which means we've done that like 30 times over the past decade. And then we're still in touch with phone calls and texts and other things, or other times we might see each other. So purposely maintaining. But then the second part of this, I talk about maintaining previous ones. It's cultivating new ones. Just don't give up making new friends. So wherever you are, plan on being all in. So a great example, I had a friend, Scott and his wife, Katie, they moved from California to Wheaton to do grad school. And we were in the same grad program, and they showed up at the church of the grad school. We became friends, and they talked about how they were just weeping on the way because they were leaving all their friends in California for this. And they knew they were only coming for 2 years, but they decided they knew it'd be easy to not put in roots for those 2 years because they were already sad about losing friends. They don't want to do it again. And it's only a short time. And they just committed to say, we want to leave these 2 years and have it be just as hard leaving these 2 years as it was to come here. And they did. They made great friendships. They were the center of community for people. So just being all in where you are while also maintaining and cultivating and not neglecting friendships from other areas or previous years. It takes a lot of work. So there's a lot of like schedule management intentionality. I mean, this is a high calling, and we've just become busy and pushed it out, but it can be done. But it takes work. And then marriage is obviously another transition that's hard. Very often people get married, and I've heard this story so many times of people hurt from when their friend gets married, they cut off all their friendships because they just, it's just them and their wife. And then if they have friends, it's just other couples. And that's just a massive mistake. So my wife and I, we have friendships together as couples, but we also free each other up to leave for an evening, go for a weekend, and hang out with another friend or other friends. Sometimes it works as a couple, sometimes it doesn't. And I've had a good friend, who's both married or others single, or that changes for them, and just be intentional to not cut people off in different seasons of life. And then when you have kids, it changes, and they're in sports. And so expectations, managing your schedule, have to be more intentional to schedule things. I mean, you just got to think, okay, in this season, how am I going to make friendship a central part of my life? Because the previous season's way of doing it is just not going to work.
Right.
And then, retiree, my church, it's just, I'm so grateful for the models I have. There's so many men and women who are vibrant and young at heart in life. And I think it's partly due to just their community. They're just connecting with each other, loving each other, spending time together. Fully engaged in the fullness of life, vacationing together. It's great. So just leaning in, not giving up, connecting people to each other, talking to people that are younger than them. In fact, one of the guys at my church, I remember when I moved here, he was probably like 70, mid 70s, was like 29. And then I was here for a couple years and realized one of my closest friends is almost 80.
Yeah.
He just became such a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
But it was his intentionality. Having my wife and I over for dinner, he had us over and another couple to introduce us to them, and we became friends. And so,
Drew, I want to keep talking about friends and maybe even personal friends and just habits in a segment I call Everywhere Every Day. This is really just born out of my own natural curiosity about what people do all day, how people kind of live and move and be. We've been talking about friends. Would you mind sharing with us along the lines of just celebrating friendship? Who are your close friends? I mean, why these guys? What is it about them individually that continues your friendship? Why do you want to keep running with them?
Yeah. So you've already gotten introduced to a few of them because I guess some of the earlier questions, it's hard for me to think about friendships without
I love it.
A friend. In fact, I remember one of my favorite things I read, it was a line from a book I was reading for research for the friendship book. And someone said like, if you want me to define friend, I'll just, this person, right? Or something like that. That's how I just think about friendship. And so that became similar for me. I thought, if you want me to think about a friend, it's Joe, it's Dane, these people. So, I'll mention a few. Obviously, I wouldn't want to leave any out, but there's just different layers of friends and degrees of closeness. But a few of them, a couple of my closest friends are more in my life every day, not every single day always, but just in everyday life. And they're also at my church here and live in town. And so that's Dave and Taylor. And so they're both also on leadership teams with me. One thing that they both have in common is they are so easy to be with. And actually, Dave's wife, Katie, is one of my wife's closer friends. And we both will just get done hanging out with them either together or apart and just think they're just so easy. Some people are, and it's not just them, but it's the relational dynamic and personality connection. There's something going on with at least me and these guys where they're just easy. I think it is partly the way they are. They know me and I don't feel judged by them. I feel accepted. the things I don't even like about myself, they don't care. I can tell them anything. In fact, with one of them, we meet every other week for coffee. We get together other times for other reasons and see each other often, but we make sure we connect every other week just to make sure we're talking about the most important things in life together. So how are we doing? What are we thinking? What's making us joyful or not in marriage and ministry, confess sin together. And so that's really helpful. Other times, we'll just get together for, a fire or get together with fire and drinks or get our families together.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of the closer friends. And then I have a few close friends that are further away. I mentioned them, Dane, Don, and Joe. And so we have to get together several times a year for an evening. We've actually started most years in recent years taking a fishing trip together as well. So just having a few days together. Together as friends, and we look forward to that as well. And then we'll also, call each other or text or things like that. And then I have some other close friends I mentioned that live further away. And there's just such a mix of personalities with this larger group that we take the trips together and are on text threads and emails. And when one of them's missing, it just seems like there's a big gap in the group because they each bring such a unique personality to the group, and they bring different things out of the other guys.
Yeah.
But I think just that sense of light, it means they're serious minded guys, but there's a lightness and an ease to be with them. And then they're just committed for the long haul with this acceptance. And I just know they're like, none of these guys I've mentioned could find anything about me. And I may just massively screw up at some time in my life. I'm just convinced none of them will let me go. No matter what I do, there's no way these guys I've mentioned are going to let me go. Even just saying out loud is powerful for me. I've never really articulated it, but, man, I'm grateful.
Amen. No, one of God's great gifts. I talk about that with my sons very often is they're forming their own friendships right now, at almost, 14 and 10 years old. Just like friends are a good gift from God.
Yeah.
Thanks for celebrating that gift with us and just naming those men.
Yep.
It's really special, man. You are an inspiration and help with our imagination as to ways that we can continue our friendships in deep but profound ways. Was there a time in your life, or maybe times, where you felt like those friends were not as present? You felt alone, and what'd you do during those days?
Yeah, so a couple times do come to mind. So we moved a little bit through life when I was growing up, and then after. And so one of them, I was a bit younger, but it was right at the beginning of high school. We moved across the country, and so I lost all my friends, had to restart, and it was really hard making new ones. There's a big cultural difference moving across the country. I had just recently become a Christian, trying to figure out what that even means, and I realized, at my new school in my grade, I didn't know anyone who was a Christian. Over time, and we even went to a couple different churches, and the youth group in my grade was empty. There was one girl who was a Christian, and she was way cooler. We weren't going to be friends because I was not cool and didn't have any friends. So eventually, I made friends with people who weren't Christians, which is, I think Christians should have friends. They can't be the closest ones, but friends who aren't believers. And that was fine. But over time, their trajectories just really changed. I couldn't do the things they wanted to be with them. So around that time, gratefully, the Lord brought some Christian friends into my life. One of them still one of my closest friends. And he was a grade younger than me. And so the Lord provided friends a grade younger, since mine didn't have many Christians. And then another time was, moving again. And I remember a fear of mine moving was, man, I'm going to wish that I could go back and reverse this move. It might just be too hard. I remember moving and then feeling like I don't have plenty of people, friendship in general, but no real close friends here. Where I am. And I don't know if it was a prayer or just this heart groan that the Lord heard. But I just remember thinking and saying out loud, even just, I need a friend. Yeah. And I think the Lord responded to that, and he provided two of my closest friends pretty quickly after that. And so I think prayer is just, should not be neglected in this category. The Lord made us for friendship. He loves us. This is a key to flourishing and growing in life. And so bringing that desire to him and asking him, how can you help me be a good friend? Can you bring me a friend? Help me look for men to befriend and connect with others, is important.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Pastor. What's a week in your life look like? I mean, how do you include it all? Family, church, friends, All of it. What's a typical week in Drew Hunter's life look like?
Sure. So, most mornings are similar. We all, as a family, wake up at the same time, and it's just a really crazy hour plus just getting everyone out the door. And then my work schedule, I try to make it kind of a typical work week because the area I live in, most people have that kind of typical work week, and so I'll do that, and then evenings, I just try to not fill with kind of programmed or leadership church things, but just leave for family, friendships, and life to keep the pace of life from being too full. We have to be really careful with sports too. So we pick like the leagues that require the least from our family, but having 4 boys, 3 of them middle school, we just got done with basketball. I'm like, where did these months go? It's not sustainable. And we actually just had a conversation with one of our sons yesterday. He wanted to do soccer. And we just said, we can't go from one sport to another. Part of it's just we have 4 of you. And the past 3 months were great. And we want you to be able to do a sport like that. But we can't do that all the time. It was a really busy season. So let's play outside. And then you can do soccer in the fall. But we can't do all these things. And he actually got it. I explained it. I'm like, Mom and I need to connect. I mean, Christina said to me like two days ago, she's like, I miss you. And I'm like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
So we're just kind of getting out from that season. But in most seasons, and even with these, we still try to build in our evenings. So I'll have an elders meeting most Monday nights. So that's a bit full, but sometimes I'll even hang out with another elder afterward, just to connect as friendship. Tuesday nights, most times we have small group. We bring our boys to that because we want our small group people to know them and them to know our small group people.
That's good.
Wednesday nights, Wednesday or Thursday, we often try to block out as hospitality nights. So we'll just put an H on our schedule. And that's been so helpful for us because just we want to have people over, but we kept having to be like, well, does this work? What date let me check with Christina, her schedule. And by just staying together, Wednesdays are our hospitality night in this season. And again, every season's got to change. We'll find out we're not doing it. It's like, okay, what's the night that works now? But it's there. Then we just know once one of us fills it, we just let the other person know. And then it's blocked. And then I know, okay, next Wednesday's full, but this Wednesday's not. So I talk to someone and say, what are you guys doing Wednesday night? Christina and I both are already committed. We don't need to ask each other permission. We have like a pre-approval for the other person to invite someone over.
Right.
That's been great. Friday nights, we try to do a family night. I like alliterations in life. I never do them with sermon points for some reason. I just kind of am opposed to that. But Friday nights are the Friday family feast and fun night. So we try to have a fun dinner, have a movie. And then weekends, we try to just have a little more relaxed as a family or with friends, have a friend over Saturday night. Sunday night, we've had a neighbor over to watch All Creatures Great and Small recently because we like that together. And a neighbor liked it as well. And so we've done that at different times of just even inviting people into what we're already doing so that friendship can happen without carving out new time. Sundays, of course, church together. So those are a few things. And then there may be any given night where Christina and I, in light of friendship, we try to just free each other up to go hang out. And if either of us has an inclination to go to friendship, we're just committed to make it happen. We want to run as far away from what we've seen in other couples where one of them feels protective and the other person will even say like, I don't think I can, Sally or Joan or whatever wants me home. It's like, oh no, I think they think that they're losing something, but actually Christina and I have found that our marriage is better by freeing each other up for friendship. We have stories. I'm becoming a better man. I'm growing. I'm happier. We're better for each other. So we try to just do that through the week as well.
Yeah. No, Jenny and I have a similar rhythm. I get a better wife. She gets a better husband.
Yeah.
From that agreement. Yeah, absolutely. So Drew, you've kind of got a micro fraternity right there in your own house. 4 boys all growing up. How are you seeing, just as a pastor and someone who pays attention to these things, how do you see, particularly just Gen Z, growing up differently than your own generation did? What effect does that have on their friendship with God and one another?
Yeah, so there obviously are differences, especially with technology, just changing so much of human life now. So obviously, there's statistics, which a lot of people know by now, but with like the advent of the smartphone, like once it got in everyone's hands, and then Instagram, and then the statistics of social media use and its connection to depression and anxiety, huge. It also keeps people away from face-to-face connection because it's so easy to just connect over text or something like that, or just be addicted to shows and social media and anything else. So obviously that's having a really damaging effect on a lot of people in the younger generation, because friendship's harder because everyone's just on their phones and technology, and then stressing with the depression, anxiety. What's interesting is that there also is a bit of a reaction going on among the younger generation. And so even talking to my boys about this, I'll just kind of say, like, talk about technology and all these things, why you're not getting a phone anytime soon, all these kinds of things. Right. And they get it. And I'll just be like, just watch your friends and just see how it goes for them. And they'll be like, yeah, I don't want that. He's always on that thing. Or yeah, he's got a, they can see it. And so I've heard of a lot of younger youth saying, I don't want a phone. I see what it's doing. I've read the stats. Please don't give me one of those things right now. Or I'm not putting social media on my phone. I'm not getting on Instagram. So that's been actually encouraging. I think another positive reaction is a lot of people have grown up, and this would be millennials and Gen Z, with parents who did move around a lot, because our culture valued success, individual success, over family and community rootedness and location. And so people just move up the corporate ladder, and that just bounces them around new areas. Right. And then they just leave friends, and then stop making friends. And then they end up friendless. That's just, people grew up watching that, and they decide, I don't want that. It's not worth it to me. I don't need the money. I don't need the bigger house. I want friends. I want family. I want to be here. So there's been a positive reaction in that way too. So there's obviously some challenges to younger generation, but also I think positive signs of people reprioritizing friendship because they've seen how the past generations have not done a good job with this.
No, I got to thank you for that, Pastor. We don't hear enough of those positives. Mm-hmm. And I think those are very real. All the ones you just mentioned, those resonate very, very deeply. So Drew, you've led for a while as a lead pastor, as a church pastor. You work with a lot of leaders. What does good leadership look like, and how does friendship affect a leader?
So good leadership looks like Jesus. He taught about it. He modeled it. I think it's intentional. So we want to look right to him, not in a cheap way of like Jesus is the answer, but he intentionally showed up to be the ideal leader. And he compared himself to the other leadership models of his day, which are still around today, right? The rulers of the Gentiles lorded over them. Yeah. It shall not be so among you. The greatest must be the servant of all. The first must be last. So leadership looks like those principles worked out as Jesus did it, with our own unique circumstances and personalities. So that just means a posture of humility, of initiative for people's good, to love them and help them grow and flourish, to know Jesus and become like him. That'd be Christian leadership. Leadership broadly would be very similar. It's leading to love people for their own good and the good of others. And then if Jesus is the model, then we both see someone who was a man of friendship, and he was leading in the context of friendship, and he was leading for people to live a life of love, which is deeply relational. And we can't forget that. The fruit of the Spirit, the one another's, like these are assumed to be done in deeply relational contexts, not just church gatherings, but in everyday life. Forgiving one another assumes you're around people enough to sin against each other, right? Bearing each other burdens means you know them enough to know their burdens and know how to bear them in ways that would feel like bearing them to them. So leading means leading people in a context of friendship, relational connection, leading as a man of friendship, and leading people to love each other in terms of friendship. So I think that's key, and would solve a lot of our problems of leadership in our culture right now. So often, I mentioned before, but often you can trace the failure of a leader, a public failure of a leader, to lack of real accountability. And accountability, not just like an accountability group or a worksheet you sign out or sign every once in a while, but the real relational kind of accountability that comes from true friendship, and walking in the light of open honesty about who you really are, in terms of your own soul and your own life and your own sin, and then just being encouraged by friends. So,
that's great, Pastor. Drew, thank you so much for joining us today.
My privilege. It was really fun to talk with you, and I'm with you, and I'm sure so many men who are listening who want to live a better life, and friendship is part of it, and we want to help men grow in this. And so thanks for having this podcast.
Pleasure, brother. Man to Men is a creation of Beta Upsilon Chi, the nation's largest Christian fraternity, commonly referred to as Bucks. You can find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi by transliterating our Greek letters and adding a .org. That's byx.org, O-R-G. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and consider joining and supporting our work with college men across the country by clicking the link in the show notes. You can help us expand. You can tell other men in your group, in your church, and you can share about this podcast on your socials. Our promise is to keep unique and in-depth conversations with biblical insights coming your way. We are produced, rather well I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. Producer Bradley's at the helm over there. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.